Welcome to Uncontested with Sean Lohman, a podcast about simplifying the complicated world of estate planning so that you can start protecting your family's legacy today. Please welcome your estate planning expert and host, Sean Lohman. Hey everybody, welcome back to Uncontested with Sean Lohman. It's me, Joel, here in the studio today with your host, Sean Lohman. How are you doing today, Mr. Sean?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Joel?
I'm doing very, very well. We're
Good.
staying out of the heat. It feels like apparently 120 or something like that out there today.
It's hot, yeah.
It is very nice to be in an air-conditioned room. Talking about some awesome estate planning topics. We have been covering just kind of the building blocks of estate planning, what you need to know, the kind of 30,000-foot level kind of knowledge that will help you essentially just prepare for the worst for you, but also thinking about how things happen with people you leave behind. So today we're going to be talking about the very important topic of guardianship. Tell us a little bit about guardianship, Sean, and why it's so important.
Sure. It is about, it's the worst time for your family, but it's about trying to make the best out of a terrible situation. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you have children, particularly young children, this is maybe the most important part of estate planning. This is maybe the reason why you would even broach the subject with your spouse or your partner. This is maybe why you would contact an attorney to begin with, is what happens to my children if and when something happens to me? We've talked before, we're all going to die. It's going to happen at some point. We just don't know when it's going to happen or what we're going to leave behind or who we're going to leave behind. We don't want to take that risk that our children are young and have nothing set up for them, nothing planned for them. And I've seen in the course of my practice, I've practiced now for 28 years almost, I've seen over the course of my practice devastating things that have happened to families and to children that were left behind with no plan in place, and what can happen. And what inevitably happens is they end up in court and they end up with a stranger, a judge, making a decision for them. And I can give you all an example. Right after not right after I started practicing, but a few years in, I represented this little boy whose parents were involved in an auto accident and they died. And he was left without a guardian, obviously, and his parents left no will, no plan in place, no guardianship in place. And so what happened over the next many months, over a year, were family members petitioning to become his guardian and fighting in court as to who was going to raise this child.
Wow. And
not only that, not only who was going to raise him, but who was going to be in control of his money and the inheritance that he received from both what his parents had and what they would ultimately, his estate would ultimately get through a wrongful death lawsuit stemming from the auto accident. So you never know what's going to happen. These parents never thought, he's going to have all of this money accessible to him because of an auto accident. They never thought they would die in an auto accident, but it happened, and no plan was in place for this child. Yeah. And so what ensued was just a terrible court battle involving this child, and probably the child ending up in a circumstance and in a situation that his parents may not have wanted.
Yeah.
So, it got me thinking, what would happen to my children? I have 4 children. What would happen to them if something happened to me? And, without a plan in place. And the thought of what would happen was unthinkable.
Yeah.
If you think about a mom and a dad, and they have 2 young children. They call the neighbor across the street, the 16-year-old neighbor, and they say, hey, would you come over and babysit our kids? They're 4 and 6 years old. Sure. So she comes over and she babysits. Mom and dad go out, and something terrible happens. Whether they're involved in an auto accident and they are in the hospital, they're just disabled, they're not dead, but they're disabled, incapacitated, or worse, or they are dead. Well, what happens? What happens to those 2 children? Well, we can play it out. The 16-year-old babysitter calls her mom when it's well past time that the parents were supposed to be home and says, I don't know what to do. So mom says, I'm coming over, but at the same time, mom calls the police and says, hey, my daughter's at home with these 2 children. We don't know what to do. The police come over, they call social services because somebody has to take custody of these children, and the only governmental agency allowed to take custody of these children is social services. So they step in, they take custody of these children. So now you've got these 2 young children. They don't know what's happened to their parents. Strangers are coming to take them, and all of this could have been prevented by prior planning from the parents. So that's what started my process and started me working with parents as far as guardianships go.
And then during, God forbid, an ensuing court battle of some sort like that, is the state usually still responsible for caring for those children, or are they temporarily given to a family member? What's the usual process?
Typically, the court will temporarily grant guardianship to someone, and then they'll have a permanent guardianship hearing. And temporary guardianship is usually given to somebody who is within the state, but that may not be who you want your children to be with. And so not only are the children placed in a temporary guardianship position, but then ultimately, if they end up with somebody who lives out of state, let's say, then there's more change for them. And so these poor kids are the ones that suffer because a plan wasn't drawn up, a simple plan. And so what we've done and what we'll go through today is I've developed a 10-step process that I ask my clients to go through in making the determination of who they want to be the ultimate guardians of their children.
All right. Well, let's dive into that. What are these 10 steps?
Okay. So first, I ask my clients to make a list of all the people that they would think could be good candidates to raise their children. And I tell them, don't leave anybody out. I mean, make this as broad a list as you can be. Family members, friends, neighbors, your roommate from college. I mean, it can be anybody that you want who you think would be a good candidate to raise children. So next, you're going to set your list aside, and you're going to consider what are the most important values that you consider in raising your kids. So, a lot of people would say, well, my religious values are the most important thing to me. I want to make sure that the people who are going to raise my children have those same religious values. Other people would say, well, I want to make sure that the people that raise my children are young. Or does it matter to you whether they're custodians or guardians would be young? Maybe you want somebody who's just young at heart, who really cares about your kids, but they're young at heart. Maybe it's somebody who thinks that having fun and traveling is really important. Maybe it's somebody who's more conservative, and those values are more important for you. So you want to make a list of these values. And by the way, as you're making these lists, so when you come up with a list of the potential candidates to be guardian, and when you come up with this list of values, you want to do this separate from your spouse or partner so that you're both coming up with your own lists and you're not judging anybody on names or lists of values. You want to do this separately.
Yeah, that does sound important.
The one thing you don't want to consider in this process is how much money the people have. Now, why wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, you want somebody who's going to be living in a great house and all that sort of stuff maybe, but ultimately it is not the responsibility of the guardians to support your child. That's your responsibility.
Yeah.
So your responsibility is to make sure that you've got the assets set aside with a custodian of those assets to provide for the care and support and education of your children. The guardian is the person who's taking care of them. So it's a very separate thing. So don't consider how much money your potential guardian has when going through this process. So step number 3 is when you come back with your spouse or partner and you sit down and you rank the values. So you're not ranking the people yet, you're ranking the values. Together, what is the most important values that we share? And you're going to come up with a list of your values so that you can go on to step 4. So once you rank those top values, then you want to rank the people against those values. And that's when you're going to come up with your top 3 people that you would consider as custodians or as guardians. So that's the top 4. Come up with a list of all the possible people. Think about the values that you want those people to have, and then sit down with your spouse or partner and list the common values and go through those values, compare them against the people that you both listed, and list your top 3.
Is it important, if we can pause really quickly, is it important to check with those people to make sure that they would be willing to assume guardianship beforehand, or is that something that comes down the road?
That's a really good question. I think it would probably make sense to check with them. If you feel like, well, I think they would absolutely say yes, then maybe not. Maybe not until you get to the end of the process, because if you took time to ask them and then they're not one of the 3,
probably not.
Then it could be offensive to them. So, but I would certainly keep this sort of fluid. And if you think, well, I'm going to check with these top 3, I think it's step 4. Once you have, and maybe that's what you were talking about.
Yeah.
I think it's step 4. Yeah. Once you compare the names against the values, you can come up with those 3 names. Yes. At that point, it would be important. But at step 1, where you're listing all the people, no, I wouldn't check with them. But certainly at step 4, when you've come up with those final 3 people, I would probably reach out to them at that point in time and see if this is something that they would be willing to do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What you don't want to do is get all the way through the last step and then surprise it on people and say, "Hey, I've listed you as the permanent guardian of my children. Should something happen to me," I would absolutely stop this process at this point, and probably go ahead and contact them. Yes,
absolutely.
So once you've got this list, those are the people that you are going to document as long-term guardians of your children. And we're going to talk about doing that in a minute. But before you do that, you want to make a list of all of the people that you would never want to raise your children. And I know that sounds really strange. You not only want to list those people, but if there are people who you feel strongly about should not raise your children, you want to put that in letter format. You want to explain why you would never want those people raising your children. And you want to put it in a sealed envelope. And you want to put it with your estate plan and explain what this is briefly on the outside. This is a letter to the court should John Smith petition to be guardian of my children. And then that sealed letter would go to the court, and the court would see why you don't want John Smith to be the guardian of your children. This is something that's very important. There's a lot of people who look really good on paper. And to a court, that person may seem like the best person in the world to be the guardian of your child. But when it comes down to it, you may have very important reasons, very sometimes private reasons, sometimes public reasons, as to why you would not want that person to have guardianship over your child. And so it's important not only to name who you want to be guardian, but to also list the people that you would not want to be guardian should something happen to you. Now you may say, Sean, how could I risk having John Smith knowing that I don't want him to be the guardian of my children? That would offend him. Well, the only way that John Smith is going to ever see that letter is if he petitions to be the guardian of your children and goes against your wishes. So that's, that right there is a good enough reason, I would think, absolutely, to have that letter made public. Number 6 is coming up with the people you wouldn't want to be guardian. Number 7 is to write a letter specifying as to why you would not want those people to be named guardian. And then this is where a lot of people stop. This is where a whole lot of people stop in the process. But we go a step further. So our step 8 would be naming temporary guardians of children. You know, most people name guardians and they put them in their will and they stick the will in a safe deposit box and that's it. They forget about it. But what happens if somebody doesn't die, a parent doesn't die? What happens if they just become disabled or incapacitated? Your will has no effect if you're simply incapacitated or disabled. So your guardian who you've named in your will, which is appropriate, your guardian who you've named in your will, that document is useless to get that individual appointed as a temporary guardian. So you need to create a document outside of your will which names a temporary guardian as well as a permanent guardian. And so going through that process to name a temporary guardian is important. Well, what would we, you might ask, what's the process of naming a temporary guardian? Well, it's sort of the same process as naming the permanent guardian, but this person is only going to be in possession of the child until the permanent guardian can get there and can be named. And so in a separate document from the will, we name a temporary guardian and permanent guardians. And the temporary guardian is usually somebody who can be there within a short period of time. So a neighbor or a close relative, somebody who can get there so that when the 16-year-old child is babysitting your kids, you have somebody who can be called before the police to come to your house, who has a document that says it's okay for them to, for this person to care for my child, and can be there, in a moment's notice. And so that's really important. My custodian that I named when my children were very young was my brother. So my brother was to take guardianship and custody of my children, but my brother lived in Maysville, Kentucky. So while he was named as the permanent guardian in my will, I had to create some sort of stopgap measure that would allow for my children to be in somebody's care from the moment that I didn't show up at home to the moment that my brother could get there from Maysville. And it could be a day. If your ultimate guardian lives in California and you're in Kentucky, it could take a lot longer than that. So you need to come up with something that gives this person authority to take your child. So, we have our parents or another sibling or a neighbor who could step in and become a temporary guardian during that interim period between something happening to me and my ultimate guardian being there to take possession of my children.
Yeah, that sounds so important.
Yeah. And then once you've done all this, once you've come up with all of the, because step number 9 would be doing the protection plan that actually documents all of this outside of the will, then step number 10 would be documenting everything in a full estate plan, as well as the outside document, which we call a kids protection plan. And so when you're doing, and when you do an estate plan, yes, you do document the guardianship of your children, but as I said, it's important to have that outside document to state who you want to be the temporary custodians and the permanent custodians. We do what's called a kids protection plan, and my office offers kids protection plans for parents, and not only does it name these custodians, the temporary and permanent custodians, but it also provides you with a document for the caregivers of your children so that they know what to do if and when something would happen to you. So it gives them a step-by-step, if we don't show up or if there were an emergency, this is what to do. And it lists your temporary custodians. It gives them their home numbers and their cell phone numbers. And if anybody has home numbers anymore, I don't know. But it says, this is how to contact them. Go in the order of contact. These temporary custodians know what you will be asking for when you call them, and they have agreed to come over. And you have several listed. And it says, before calling police, call these people. Then they come over, and they will call the police. And they will let the police know there's an emergency, but I do have a signed affidavit from this individual giving me temporary or granting me the authority to stay temporarily with these children.
And it seems like that may be a rather unfortunate topic to tell your 16-year-old babysitter coming over, like, hey, in case something terrible happens, call these people. But it does seem like it's just hands down important enough to be able to handle.
And it gives them the peace of mind of knowing what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, we may think, oh, this is going to scare them, but ultimately that's sort of in the back of their mind anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit of caution that these kids go into these situations with anyway. So when you give them a laminated sheet that says, if something were to happen to you or the kids of the house, call 911. If something were to happen, like we didn't get home in time and you couldn't reach us, call these people. They will come over and help you, and they know what to do, and you'll be okay, and the kids will be okay. That is some sort of security and comfort to a 16-year-old who's been charged with watching this 4 and 6-year-old child. And so that is the process that we go through in establishing guardianships. What we then do, which I think is unique to our office, is we encourage people to go one step forward and to document legacy planning for their kids. What does that mean? Well, one of the most important things that we can pass to our kids, yes, the money is important, and setting up the guardians are important, and all of that is absolutely essential in planning for your kids. But one of the most important things that we can plan for or that we can pass on to our kids is our own voice and our hopes and our aspirations for them, and what we hope they do in life, and how we hope life treats them, and for them to hear that from our own voices. And so one thing that we will do for people that have young children is we will offer them the opportunity to record that, to sit down with us, and we ask them, and we do basically an interview, and ask them, what do you want to say to your kids if they are listening to this down the road? What do you hope for them? What are your dreams for them? Tell us what your thoughts on religion are for them. Whatever the agreed to topics are that we've discussed in advance, the parents have the opportunity to leave that with their children. And that is priceless.
Oh, man, it is.
You may have recorded it when your kids are 6 and 4 years old, and they may not be listening to it until they're 16 and 14, or maybe when they're 26 and 24, or maybe older, but you've recorded this for them as far as what are your dreams for them down the road. When I had my kids in Florida one time, we got caught in this rainstorm. And I mean, it was a bad rainstorm. We were running back to our place, and we were on this boardwalk, true story. And it just started pouring so badly that we could not move anymore. There was lightning striking all around us. We got down on this boardwalk, and it was very frightening. And we were just soaked. I mean, we were absolutely drenched. Everything we had was soaked. And we finally made it back to the condo, and I pulled out my phone, and my phone had died. It was ruined. It was before the newest version of iPhone, by the way, and which I learned the hard way, that is waterproof.
Yeah, water resistant does not mean waterproof.
Yeah, long story behind that one. But this phone died because we were caught in this rainstorm, and I got back, and the last phone message that my mom had left me before she died was gone.
Oh, man.
it was the last recording that I had of her voice. And it was devastating. I mean, she said, "Hi, honey, it's Mom. Just called to say I love you." That was all she said on the voicemail. And she died days later unexpectedly. Her voice is fading now. I'll never have anything that reminds me of her voice again. And so when I think about that, and I think about this legacy planning that we try to help parents do, and it's up to the client. The client can do it or not do it. We don't charge them for it or anything like that. But it is something that we've done for many parents over the years, and something that we've sort of helped, lead them through. But it is invaluable to children down the road to have this recording of their mom and their dad telling them what their dreams are for them.
Yeah.
And it's something that that's just absolutely invaluable to these kids.
Yeah.
And I think it gives parents, I think this planning in general, and I can leave it at this. I think that this planning in general, planning for the guardians of your children and having a plan in place, and doing this legacy planning, and knowing that your voice is going to be heard by your children as far as your wishes and your dreams for them, as well as doing an estate plan at the same time, knowing who's going to be in charge of their assets, when your children will, get their assets, what it will be spent for over the period of time. All of that together allows you to live a better life, not constantly worried about what will happen, because you know what will happen. And so it allows you to live your life more freely. It allows you to live your life with comfort, knowing that these things are already taken care of.
Absolutely. Sean, couldn't agree more. Someone that has two young children, I have a 2 and a 4-year-old, like this is front of mind.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. It should be.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you so much for this just, riveting and somewhat, unfortunate topics and stuff like that. But man, this stuff is important. And so we invite all of our listeners, come and see Sean, look his website up. Those will be in the show notes of the episode today. And again, we want to thank you for listening to Uncontested with Sean Lohman. We are always looking for new topics to discuss, and we want to field your questions about things that are just equally as important as our topic today on guardianship. And so if you do have any of those questions or anything you'd like to hear us address, please reach out. All of our social links will be in the episode notes as well. Join us again next time for more great conversations and practical insights into the world of estate planning. Thanks so much for listening.